In an Hammerhead is a Navy submarine with one round ready time, and one jerk, one fuel, and one equipment cost. It has 70 damage and 100 health, which is significant for this rank card. It also has a skill called Crack Shot. It hits first in battle. This means that during battle phase, when individual cards are fighting against each other, this card will always hit first, and should it be able to eliminate the target, it will not take any damage after that because the opponent is not able to counter. However, if two forces with Crack Shot would be fighting each other, then both forces would damage each other normally. There's also a mechanic called Finest, which lets you bypass Crack Shot. However, there are currently no submarines with Finest mechanics on set 1. When you consider what this card is about, we can easily see it has a fairly high health value and a fairly low damage value compared to other submarines, if you take a look at the subs and other Navy forces in general. You notice that most submarine forces have around 80 damage and 80 health, meaning that in block situations this card would be able to block these forces but unable to eliminate them. Additionally, in a Hammerhead is the clearest counter for the Black Wave, which is a Navy card with 70 damage and 50 health. Since Hammerhead has 70 damage and 100 health, it would be able to not only last through the encounter, but also use the Crack Shot mechanics to eliminate it before it hits back. Besides that, it's not that strong against the other submarines, besides of course being unkillable by them, unless they use special mechanics. So when it comes to just using this as a blocker, it's a fairly sturdy one, but you can of course increase its damage value should you want to get more out of it. There's a building card called Military Headquarters, which increases all your forces' damage by 10. This does of course apply to anything, including soldiers, besides a submarine. And it's pretty decently sturdy, so you can defend it to a degree, though it's very high on the moral penalty side with 3, so you'd have to really consider if you want to use this card. It's very good with the VMDs, since it allows you to replace the power resource cost with it. So if you want to go like a submarine combination and use VMD cards, stuff like that, it might be worth using. You would however need to use 1 copy at least to counter the non-Fireforge variants of some of the submarine cards in the game, just as the ZS Wolf or the GR Viper. That does have a standard mechanic, so you would have to first remove them. Additionally, if you use 2 of those, you could broaden the spectrum a bit, and then also counter Fireforge variants of, let's say, 8 attacks. But it's a pretty significant risk to take to just use 2 of these territories that can also be demoed. This is a mechanic that immediately eliminates buildings just to get the scalp of that kind of situation, so I don't necessarily recommend it, though using 1 of these might be definitely worth it. Of course, should you want to play it faster, you can always use Secure Ports, which also increases its health and allows you to find it from the deck, but it has a fairly long ready time combined with its required timer, so even if you play this first turn, you would still take 3 turns to be able to play a free Hammerhead, face down, so 4 turns total before it's ready. So always if you go Secure Port strategy, you probably want to just stall your opponent to oblivion, as well as use hastening cards. This is also an easy card to eliminate. Notably, if you check the Hammerhead's counterparts, they mostly have 80 damage, so all the submarine cards would be able to wipe this out pretty easily with single hit. If you want to defend this building, you could of course use the Hyper Defense Barrier. This is a really expensive card, but if you attach this to a building, it basically acts like a buffer. Opponent is unable to demo it, and they have to take this building out before they can target it. Also, one good thing to do if you want to boost the Hammerhead is, since some of the submarines have stealth, so you just use something with Seek, like Advanced Detection Facility or the Amplified Uplink Facility, that both have Seek and remove stealth from the opponent. There's also of course Kraken, which goes really well with the Navy cards. Since Kraken also has Seek and it removes stealth from the opponent's forces, this significantly expands the range in a Hammerhead is able to block, allowing you to defend against most submarines. Additionally, a good moral card to use is the Naval Blockade, and Hammerhead being a submarine, it allows you to use Naval Blockade, which prevents opponent from producing equipment cards, as long as you have at least 2 submarines or Navy units in your force, which is fairly easy to do with this C value submarines. Since the equipment editors are second most resourceful when it comes to production besides the generic ones, so a lot of players will be using those. If you just want to boost his defensive capabilities, however, that's not easy. There is of course the Nathan Smith, and since the Hammerhead has only has 100 health, just having a single Nathan Smith plus 5 watching it will also already give it 130 health, which puts it on a significantly better position to block units. For example, if you take back a look at the Navy forces, you can now block cards like the D24I, which is a destroyer card and has a significant 120 damage. And just adding a few more Smiths to it, 2 total, you could now block cards like Triton Ironside, which has 160 damage, and a lot of the other cards outside the North 6, which would need 1 additional push, and the Kraken. The push is really easy to do. You just go for the territories and use a card called Secret Name and Region. This card works specifically well with Hammerhead, since Hammerhead's high health value combined with this and 2 or actually just 5 watching it and 3 Nathan Smiths, you would be also able to block all the above other Navy units up to the Kraken, which would always eliminate it, since Kraken is the most powerful Navy card in the game with 300 attack. And I think highest ones which you can go with these submarines and just using the Smith cheese is going to be in the bit over 200 range. So it's a definitely powerful card to use as blocker. Since Hammerhead and most of the submarines get fuel resources, you might want to use some aid units, let's say John Reiner. You produces 1 fuel, so you don't have to necessarily put the fuel on your territories, since most fuel territories are extremely expensive to use. This works generally for most of the submarines, even if they have power cost. Just take an 8 unit with power and you can just take the pressure off your territories instead of putting them under risk. Do however remember that 8 units are really easy to take out, so that's always a risk. When it comes to leaders that go well with the Hammerhead, and the obvious choices are of course Baron. Goes well with all Navy forces and able to find them, as well as play them easily on the field with his 5-point ability. As well as course Bancroft, who specializes entirely for submarines and is able to put them in the field entirely for free every 2 turns. With of course the ready time needing to be played out by mechanics, so it will be delayed by 1 turn before you actually can use them. As well as making them stealth units if you attack with them once you use her 5-point ability. Generally Hammerhead is a really beefy unit, so if you just want to defend a submarine, it can work surprisingly well with all the leaders. Though in some cases, for example the Zoff, you might want to consider drone options, because he's a specifically drone leader, and there is a drone card is pretty much as effective as Hammerhead as a defensive unit, and has even more damage. Talking of course the Gear Current, which is almost identical card but has 1 point extra damage, making it already a more solid option, and the fuel cost is replaces power, which is slightly more dangerous to have on the field than fuel. Let's go for Hammerhead's weaknesses. Since Hammerhead has 1 turn ready time and 70 health, it's vulnerable to all the control cards in the game, which are the usual suspects, namely Pull Critical part, which has a disabled effect and eliminates it outright. Lever Hijack, which lets your opponent take control of it. The Destructive Hijacking, which not only takes it out, but also does its damage to your territory, so that can be a significant counter, a bit expensive though. And of course there is the Brainwash, that not only takes control of a card, but also gives you a penalty should you regain the control or destroy the card, because it's never a nice thing to destroy your own units. And of course you can use the Equipment Recall to flip it face down, though that being a single turn option, I do not recommend it in most cases. Sergeant Gabler McGurner will always be mentioned in situations like this, because he specializes in taking control of non-stealth cards, which is the A9's biggest problem here, and it would be almost always able to take it down. As for VMDs, however, There are no VMDs in Z1 that specifically target Navy forces. So on the usual last bit of kinetic space strike, it could of course take it out, but it's too expensive or something like that, so I don't recommend it. And there's of course the orbital sun cannon with exactly 100 health damage. Which on the other hand, if your opponent uses anything that increases the health of this card, like Fire Fortune, which is fairly cheap for rank 2 cards, or the Secret Naval Base card, the sand cannon wouldn't be able to take it down with a single hit, so opponent would use multiple ones, and since it has 4 turn ready time, you can see it coming a mile away. Sum this up, for Hammerhead is a highly defensive submarine that always usually gets first hit on your opponent. That lacks a significant amount of damage, so it will be able to last most of its blocking pairs, but is unable to take them out unless you boost it with cards that permanently increase its damage value. With just Fire Forging it becomes resistant to most submarines, since the highest damage submarines have in Z1 is 100 on the Ghost Metal side, though it also has stealth. It's also really easy to boost Hammerhead's health using right cards to make it match and block even the most dangerous Navy units should you want to do something like that. It also enables you to choose some of the most powerful cards in the game, such as the Nuclear attack, which requires submarines, and the naval blockage, which prevents opponent from entirely using equipment resources for a single turn. It, however, has a severe problem with taking out other units, so you will more than likely end up flooding the field with this card if you want to use it as a defensive force against opponents, since the numbers won't be decreasing anytime soon if you just use this to block. That being said, Ace 9 is extremely vulnerable for control cards, so be careful about it getting picked off or just swapping side, because it doesn't really matter how many hundreds you have held on this card if an opponent can just snap their fingers and take it over. So be careful when you use cards that have no real defenses against tactics like that, unless you want to use the secure update cards on them, which is not a necessarily ideal choice for something that has this low resource cost. Of course, should the opponent take control of it, you can just simply take it back, resulting in an interesting volleyball type of bounce in play with the submarine cards. But it's definitely something that you can consider as a strategy should you just want to use it as a bait. When you consider about Fireforging this card, I'd say it becomes entirely a matter about how you build your deck and what you want to do. If you use the Secret Naval region, you do not need to Fireforge this card for it to counter most submarines if you want to use it for that. If you want to go for cheesier combos and just boost it health insanely, so it also acts as a deterrent against the other Navy units, then you most likely want to Fireforge it. So it entirely relies on how much you want to rely on it and other submarines as heavy blockers, should you Fireforge it or not. I personally probably would Fireforge it, however, just so I wouldn't have to worry about single hits of the orbital sun cannon, which does exactly 100 damage, and since the Secret Naval region uses generic resources, it's not necessarily ideal card to be used on most decks that I might want to have a Navy block on it. So definitely if you go full submarine decks, especially with Bancroft, I would almost always use it, just for the additional health, which is a significant boost in this game. Well, I think that Hammerhead is a pretty solid defender card, especially if you boost it, but if you just want a specialized submarine to do something like weak off mechanics, hinder opponent, or increase intel, depending what you need on the field, you probably want to use something else. And if you use Leader's Lax Up, there is a Roan option that also has 100 health and fills that requirement better than that one would. So if you go for drone decks, this one is not a card you want to use as a submarine.